Alright y'all, here's part 4, buried treasures. Now Virginia and West Virginia, we're going to talk about. Now in Virginia we got 5 of them. Number 1, the mysterious Beale treasure. Number 2, John Crismo's buried coins. Number 3, the lost Smith family treasure. And number 4, the Gray Ghost's lost treasure. Number 5 is the Snow Hill Farm treasure. And in West Virginia we got 4 of them. No, we got 6 of them. The Doll House treasure of Upshur County, the Peddler's lost catch, hidden treasure in the Buchanan River Valley. 9, 10, 11 is other tales of lost and buried treasures in West Virginia. So now we're going to get on ahead with this and we're going to get going. Alright, let's start out with the mysterious Beale treasure. Now the best known and most sought after lost treasure in the state of Virginia is the mysterious and elusive Beale catch. This buried fortune is said to consist of nearly 3,000 pounds of gold, 5,088 pounds of silver, and $13,000 worth of jewels. Now the Beale treasure has been the subject of books, magazine articles, and television programs, and one network news broadcast said the search for the Beale treasure was one of the longest and costliest in the history of the United States. Specific directions to the fabulous Beale treasure can be found in 3 separate codes devised by Beale himself, as far as is known. Only one has ever been deciphered. The other 2 complex codes, though having been examined by cryptoanalysts and studied by computer and decoding experts, remain unbroken. And the location of the great treasure is as much a mystery today as it was when Thomas Jefferson Beale and 8 friends buried it in Bedford County in 1819 and 1821. Little is known of Beale's life. What is known is that early in 1817 he and 29 other Virginians journeyed westward to New Mexico and Colorado. Now 2 conflicting stories, neither proven, give Beale's reasons for leaving Virginia. One tale is that he shot his neighbor in Fincastle, Virginia, in a fight over a woman. Believing the man dead and fearing he would be hung for the deed, Beale fled west. Now the second tale, considerably less colorful, is that Beale gathered up friends for a buffalo hunting and fur trapping expedition to the western plains and mountains. Whatever the reason, Beale and his companions eventually found themselves in south central Colorado, searching for a pass into the higher reaches of the Rocky Mountains, where they planned to hunt beaver. Now as the party climbed the foothills of the Great Range, one of the men discovered a thick vein of gold in some exposed rock. Deciding that mining the ore would profit them more than trapping and selling furs, the men spent the next few years systematically excavating the precious metal from the rock matrix of the mountainside. They found silver nearby and mined great quantities of it too. After 18 months, they had an impressive stockpile of gold and silver. The men, all good friends, agreed to split the fortune evenly. They held a meeting and decided to send Beale and 8 others back to Virginia to bury the rich hoard in a safe place. Now the others would keep working in the mines while awaiting the return of the Beale party. On a bitterly cold afternoon in late November, Beale and his companions, along with 2 wagon loads of gold and silver nuggets, arrived at Goose Creek in Bedford County, Virginia. The party followed a narrow and seldom used trail which paralleled the creek and led into a gap in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains near Peak of the Otters. Once in the pass, Beale looked around until he found what he wanted, a place where he could bury the treasure. Snow began to fall, and the men worked swiftly, digging a square pit 6 feet deep. As the wind swirled the snow around them, the miners lined the floor and walls of this man-made vault with flat stones they found nearby. Into this chamber they placed the gold and silver from nearly 2 years' work in the Colorado mines. The nuggets were packed into iron cooking pots, the covers tightly secured with wire. The men filled the hole to the top with dirt and covered it with rocks and forest debris. Now, Beale and his party rested several days after the long journey from the west. They bought supplies and fresh riding stock and started back in early December. They rejoined the other miners in the Colorado foothills nearly a month later. Mining continued, and after almost 2 more years, another load of gold and silver was ready to be shipped east and buried with the previous cache. Beale was again chosen for the trip. The partners agreed to keep mining until they had enough gold and silver for a third and final trip to Virginia, where they would unearth the rich cache, divide it, and return to a normal life as wealthy men. One morning in the third week of November in 1821, the wagons were loaded to capacity with the ore. Bidding farewell to those who remained to work in the mines, Beale and his companions began the second long journey back to the Blue Ridge Mountains. Now, reaching the cache a little over a month later, Beale and his companions added the second load of gold and silver. When the hole refilled and camouflaged, Beale and his fellows decided to write a description of the secret location and its contents and leave it in the area for the others to find, should something happen to them. Now, over the next several years, Beale and a few of his partners devised a series of incredibly complex codes. They produced 3 sheets of paper, each covered with a series of numerals. These 3 papers have since been called the Beale Code and have mystified researchers for well over a century. Cipher number 1 allegedly tells how to find the fabulous treasure and remains unbroken to this day. Cipher number 2 describes the complete contents of the treasure vault. Cipher number 3 supposedly lists the names of the 30 men who were to divide the treasure equally. When the ciphers were completed, they were placed in a metal strongbox fastened with a stout lock. By agreement of the 9 men who buried the ore, the lockbox was given to one Robert Morris, a man they all knew and trusted. Morris, a quiet gentleman who ran a respectable inn at Lynchburg and often kept valuables for travelers, readily agreed to keep the strongbox for Beale and his friends. At Morris's invitation, the miners stayed several days at the inn resting. The day they left for Colorado, Beale told Morris that if someone did not return within 10 years to claim the strongbox and its contents, Morris was to open it. Beale also told Morris that within a few weeks he would mail him the information he would need to interpret the codes in the strongbox. Now, Beale and his 8 companions rode away from the inn a short time later, disappearing into the dense forest to the west. Now, Morris never saw any of them again. About 2 months later, Morris received a short letter from Beale that had been mailed from St. Louis. The letter reiterated what Beale had already told Morris, that the contents of the strongbox would be meaningless without the decoding keys. He said the necessary keys were in a sealed envelope with Morris's address on it. The envelope, according to Beale, was given to a friend in St. Louis with instructions to mail it to Morris in June of 1832. Now, Morris never again heard from Beale, nor did he receive the envelope 10 years later. Although the designated time had elapsed, the trustworthy Morris refused to open the strongbox, thinking that someone from the Beale party would eventually return to claim it. Now, years passed, and Morris soon forgot about the strongbox, which he had hidden away under some clutter in an old shed adjacent to the inn. One day, about 23 years after Beale had left the strongbox, Morris chanced upon it while searching the shed for a harness. When Morris broke open the box, he first saw lying atop the contents a letter addressed to him. In elaborate detail, the letter told of the expedition to the west, the discovery of the gold and silver, and the subsequent trips to the Blue Ridge Mountains to bury the treasure. The letter ended by asking Morris to use the code to find and dig up the treasure. Morris was to divide it into 31 equal parts, one for each of the original participants and one for Morris himself. Now, Morris examined the 3 pieces of paper which bore the Beale code. Each was written over with an apparently random series of numbers, ranging from single to quadruple digits. Intrigued, the innkeeper spent many hours trying to decipher the curious arrangements of numbers, but couldn't make any sense of them. For the next several years, Morris tried to decipher the complex Beale code, but he eventually gave up. Sometime later, when Morris was convinced no one would return to claim the strongbox and its contents, he showed the codes and letters to a friend, James Ward. For months, Ward pored over the 3 pieces of paper and eventually broke cipher number 2. Purely by accident, Ward discovered this code was based on the Declaration of Independence. When finally deciphered, it read, "I have deposited in the county of Bedford, about 4 miles from Buford's Inn, in an excavation or vault 6 feet below the surface of the ground, the following articles belonging to the parties whose names are given in number 3 herewith. The first deposit was 1,014 pounds of gold and 3,800 pounds of silver. This was deposited in November 1819. The second deposit was made December 1821 and consisted of 1,907 pounds of gold and 1,288 pounds of silver. Also, jewels obtained in St. Louis in exchange to save transportation and valued at $13,000. The above is packed securely in iron pots with iron covers. The vault is lined with stones and the vessels lie on solid rock and are covered with other stones. Paper number 1 describes the exact location of the vault, so no difficulty will be had in finding it." Ward, suspecting the other 2 codes would likewise be deciphered by using the Declaration of Independence, eagerly tackled them, but was soon disappointed to learn that they apparently had separate and independent keys. Ward was particularly interested in breaking cipher number 1, which allegedly gave directions to the treasure site, but could make no sense of it whatsoever. The code, containing 520 numbers, is reproduced in its entirety at the end of the story. Now, Ward worked on the 2 unbroken codes for several months before giving up. With Morris's permission, Ward made the codes public. Ever since the Beale Code was made known, hundreds of people, cryptographers, computer programmers, historians, treasure hunters, adventurers, have tried to decipher it. For many years, the Blue Ridge Mountains in and around Bedford County were fairly teeming with those who thought they had an inside track on the treasure. To date, however, the first and third codes remain unbroken and the fabulous treasure is still hidden. Although the Beale treasure is Virginia's best known and most sought, many believe it is nothing more than an elaborate hoax and that Thomas Jefferson Beale never existed. Skeptics have suggested that innkeeper Morris and his friend Ward fabricated the entire story. They point out that Thomas Jefferson, the 3rd President of the United States and author of the Declaration of Independence, on which one code was based, had a penchant for writing in numerical codes and ciphers. It may also be worth noting that a man named Beale brought word to the east of the fantastic gold finds in California during the early 1800s. Now, if the Beale treasure is a hoax, 2 things remain to be explained. First of all, what would have been the purpose of such a trick? There appears no obvious or profitable motive for such a sophisticated and elaborate hoax. Both Morris and Ward shunned any kind of publicity, and neither profited from his association with the Beale treasure. Secondly, the sheer intricacy of the codes makes it seem unlikely to have been devised merely as a prank. Now, the Beale treasure probably does in fact exist, and in exactly the amounts indicated by Beale himself in Cipher 2. Now, many who have researched the Beale story over the years have agreed on the authenticity of the events, the treasure, and the codes. Now, we're going to talk about the Beale cipher. I'm sorry, you guys, it's going to be a bunch of numbers. It's going to drive me nuts. Okay, 71, 194, 38, 1701, 89, 76, 11, 83, 1629, 48, 94, 63, 132, 16, 111, 95, 84, 341, 975, 14, 40, 64, 27, 81, 139, 213, 63, 90, 11, 11, 20, 8, 15, 3, 126, 2018, 40, 74, 758, 485, 604, 230, 436, 664, 582, 150, 251, 284, 308, 231, 124, 211, 486, 225, 401, 370, 11, 101, 305, 139, 189, 17, 33, 88, 208, 193, 145, 194, 73, 416, 918, 263, 28, 500, 538, 356, 117, 136, 219, 27, 176, 130, 10, 460, 25, 485, 18, 436, 65, 84, 200, 283, 118, 320, 138, 36, 416, 280, 15, 71, 224, 961, 44, 16, 401, 339, 88, 61, 304, 12, 21, 24, 283, 134, 92, 63, 246, 486, 682, 7, 219, 184, 360, 780, 18, 64, 463, 474, 131, 160, 79, 73, 440, 95, 18, 64, 581, 34, 69, 128, 367, 461, 17, 81, 12, 103, 820, 62, 116, 97, 103, 862, 70, 60, 13, 17, 471, 540, 208, 121, 890, 346, 36, 150, 59, 568, 614, 13, 120, 63, 219, 812, 2160, 1780, 99, 35, 18, 21, 136, 872, 15, 28, 170, 88, 430, 44, 112, 18, 147, 436, 195, 320, 37, 122, 113, 6, 140, 8, 120, 305, 42, 58, 461, 44, 106, 301, 13, 48, 680, 93, 86, 116, 530, 82, 568, 9, 102, 38, 416, 89, 71, 216, 728, 965, 818, 2, 38, 121, 195, 14, 326, 148, 234, 1855, 131, 234, 361, 824, 581, 623, 48, 961, 1926, 33, 10, 1101, 365, 92, 88, 181, 275, 346, 201, 206, 86, 36, 219, 320, 829, 840, 68, 326, 1948, 122, 65, 216, 284, 919, 861, 326, 985, 233, 64, 68, 232, 431, 960, 50, 29, 81, 216, 321, 603, 14, 612, 81, 360, 36, 51, 62, 194, 78, 60, 200, 314, 676, 112, 428, 18, 61, 136, 247, 819, 921, 1060, 464, 895, 10, 6, 66, 119, 38, 41, 49, 612, 423, 962, 302, 294, 875, 78, 14, 23, 111, 109, 62, 31, 501, 823, 216, 280, 34, 24, 150, 1000, 162, 286, 19, 21, 17, 340, 19, 242, 31, 86, 234, 140, 607, 115, 33, 191, 67, 104, 86, 52, 88, 16, 80, 121, 67, 95, 122, 216, 548, 96, 11, 201, 77, 364, 218, 65, 667, 890, 236, 154, 211, 10, 98, 34, 119, 56, 216, 119, 71, 218, 1164, 1496, 1817, 51, 39, 210, 36, 3, 19, 540, 232, 22, 141, 617, 84, 290, 80, 46, 207, 411, 150, 29, 38, 46, 172, 85, 194, 36, 261, 543, 897, 624, 18, 212, 416, 127, 931, 19, 4, 63, 96, 12, 101, 418, 16, 140, 230, 460, 538, 19, 27, 88, 612, 1431, 90, 716, 275, 74, 83, 11, 426, 89, 72, 84, 1300, 1706, 814, 221, 132, 40, 102, 34, 858, 975, 1101, 84, 16, 79, 23, 16, 81, 122, 324, 403, 912, 227, 936, 447, 55, 86, 34, 43, 212, 107, 96, 314, 264, 1065, 323, 428, 601, 203, 124, 95, 216, 814, 2906, 654, 820, 2, 301, 112, 176, 213, 71, 87, 96, 202, 35, 10, 2, 41, 17, 84, 221, 736, 820, and 214, 1160, and 760. All right, we're going to talk about John Crismo's buried coins. Early one autumn morning in 1887 on a remote ranch near Pecos, Texas, a young cowhand was trying to wake his bunkhouse companion, an elderly cowboy named John Crismo. When Crismo did not respond to his call, the boy walked over to his bunk and tried to shake him awake. The old man was dead. The foreman was summoned, a burial was arranged, and as the owner of the ranch searched Crismo's belongings for the name of a relative, he chanced upon an old and well-worn diary. It held fascinating details of buried treasure, a treasure that may today be worth nearly $4 million, and yet still lies buried beneath a few inches of soil and rock on a lonely mountainside in western Virginia. The ranch owner pored over the often unintelligible writing in Crismo's diary and over several weeks pieced together the story of the buried treasure. Now in 1846, when the United States declared war on Mexico, a very young John Crismo enlisted in the Army in his home state of New York. Before leaving for foreign soil, Crismo got engaged to a local girl, and they agreed to marry when his enlistment was over. While Crismo was in Mexico, however, his betrothed fell ill, dying only days before he returned. He never recovered from the loss of his sweetheart. He visited her grave, then mounted his horse and rode out of New York, never to return. For years, the young man roamed the wilderness of Pennsylvania and Ohio, keeping to himself and living like an Indian deep in the woods, craving neither the sight nor company of other humans. When the war between the states erupted, Crismo, wishing to return to combat, rode eastward into Pennsylvania, enlisted into the Union Army, and was assigned to a cavalry regiment that was immediately ordered to Virginia. Crismo's unit made several raids on farms and communities in western Virginia, taking livestock, food, and arms, and often filling their own pockets with stolen money. In time, the cavalry force became little more than a gang of bandits robbing and looting its way across the Appalachian landscape. Now one day, the unit was sent to patrol an area in southwestern Virginia, in Tazewell County. The men, about 24 in number, camped on the side of the mountain that overlooked a long, narrow valley, flat and richly productive. At one end of the attractive valley was a mansion, and the prospect of finding something valuable at the fine home appealed to the raiding troops. The valley and everything in it belonged to the eccentric James Grierson. Now Grierson, who had inherited a fortune, made another from cotton and livestock. The old bachelor owned 30 slaves and was thought the wealthiest man in western Virginia. He was reputed to be worth nearly $1 million, a staggering amount at that time. When the war broke out, Grierson, concerned about the safety of his fortune, withdrew all of his money from the area banks and converted it into gold coins. With the help of his favorite slave, Grierson packed the coins into canvas bags and buried them behind his barn. Anticipating a successful raid, the cavalrymen rode into the valley and overran Grierson's farm, taking the owner prisoner and hanging him by his wrists from a tree limb in the yard. Throughout an intense and sometimes brutal interrogation, Grierson steadfastly refused to reveal where he'd buried his fortune, and the Union raiders soon realized that the old man preferred death to giving up his wealth. Grierson apparently did not survive his interrogation. Now, while Grierson was being tortured, Crismo befriended the old slave, who knew where the plantation owner's fortune lay. With some cajoling and the promise of freedom, Crismo convinced the slave to show him where Grierson's wealth was buried. The slave took Crismo behind the barn, dug about 2 feet down, and pulled up one of the heavy sacks of gold coins. Crismo looked at it and told the slave not to tell any of the other cavalrymen about the treasure. Several days later, the cavalry unit was assigned to another area several miles away. Once they had established camp and were awaiting further orders, Crismo returned to the Grierson farm under cover of night, and with the help of the old slave, dug up the old coins buried behind the barn. The two men loaded the gold onto a pair of horses and hauled it to where the cavalry had camped before raiding the Grierson plantation, a short distance from the old campground. Crismo and the black man dug a large hole, deposited the coins, and covered the cache with rocks and forest debris. Then they started for the new cavalry encampment. On the way, Crismo handed the old slave a fistful of gold coins he had taken from one of the sacks and gave the man his freedom. Crismo told none of his companions about the Grierson fortune when he returned. That night, by the dim light of the fire, Crismo sketched in his ragged diary a crude map showing about where the gold coins lay. In his rough and clumsy grammar, he added descriptions of the terrain and landmarks. The next day, the cavalry unit left Tazewell County for a new assignment in the eastern part of the state. As the war went on, the regiment fought in several skirmishes, and in one, Crismo was seriously wounded. After a lengthy recovery in a field hospital, he was granted an honorable discharge and sent on his way. He first thought of returning to Tazewell County and digging up the gold, but continuing military action there would have made that difficult. So Crismo took his few belongings and traveled westward instead, roaming the country and regaining his health while biding his time until he could return to Virginia for the gold. For many years, Crismo wandered the sparsely settled regions west of the Mississippi River, eventually finding his way to Texas. Traveling from town to town and taking odd jobs, the former Union cavalryman barely earned enough to survive. His few diary entries during this time suggest that the wound Crismo had suffered was giving him some serious problems and causing great pain. His writings also suggest that he was not mentally sound at that time. Years passed, and Crismo eventually landed a job as a cowhand on a ranch near Pecos, Texas. Though much older than most cowboys and quite infirm, he proved a consistent and loyal worker up to the day he quietly passed away in his sleep. In the years that followed, Crismo's diary passed through several hands and eventually wound up in the possession of a Pecos County man who decided to seek out the buried cache of coins. Using the clumsily drawn, faded, and somewhat vague map, the searcher arrived at a small Virginia settlement called Aberdeen. Just north of the hamlet, the man located the long, narrow valley that had once been part of the extensive Grierson plantation. The land was now state property, having reverted to a government ownership when Grierson passed away, leaving no heirs. Just north of the old Grierson plantation was a prominent mountain, undoubtedly the one on which Crismo and his cavalry unit camped before attacking the farm. After exploring the mountain for several days, the searcher discovered what must have been the old campground. He found 2 Union Army-issue canteens, numerous shell casings, and other items suggesting a temporary cavalry bivouac. While Crismo's directions were clear enough to this point, his diary entries were actually set on which side of the camp he buried the fortune. For weeks, the treasure hunter searched. He finally gave up and went back to Texas. Crismo's diary was relegated to a high, dusty shelf in a storeroom, and in time was lost. The disappointed searcher never tried again to find the treasure. Now others have searched for John Crismo's buried coins. So-called experts using metal detectors and dowsing rods have combed the mountainside near the old cavalry camp, trying to find the $4 million catch. No one knows what became of the diary, and the treasure remains hidden to this day. Alright, we're going to talk about the lost Smith family treasure. In the years before the Civil War, Abraham Smith and his 2 sons, Eli and Samuel, owned and operated one of the largest and most successful plantations in western Virginia. Not far from the farm, near the Clinch Mountains, was a large salt works in which the Smith family had an interest. The vast works supplied much of the salt for this part of the South and was a primary source for the Southern Army as well. Now, early on the morning of October 2nd, 1864, Abraham Smith learned that a large Union cavalry contingent, led by the ruthless General George Stoneman, was rapidly approaching the valley. Smith decided to hide the family fortune lest it be found and seized by the Yankees. He hurriedly gathered up approximately $58,000 worth of gold and silver coins and jewelry, and with the help of his sons, buried it in the middle of a partially completed roadbed that led to the salt mines near Saltville. Stoneman, with orders to destroy the salt works and thus disrupt Confederate Army supply and cause economic havoc in the area, led his Union force into the valley late that morning, just after the Smiths finished burying this fortune. Stoneman expected little resistance in the valley and was therefore surprised when a large combined force of citizens and Confederate soldiers met him. Southern scouts had warned area residents of the approaching Yankees. The hastily assembled force of farmers, laborers, and rebel soldiers engaged the Union cavalry in a fierce battle. Now, after nearly an hour of fighting, Stoneman called for a retreat. The untrained but enthusiastic Southerners pursued the famous cavalry leader and his troops back through the Cumberland Pass and clear into Kentucky. Now, after the skirmish, Eli Smith could not be accounted for. He was not among the dead and wounded lying in the valley, and was thought captured by the Yankees and executed along the trail during the disorganized retreat. Though searchers looked for Eli's body for several days, it was never found. A few days after the battle, Abraham and Samuel Smith returned to the roadbed, only to find that the cached jewels and coins had already been dug up and removed, presumably by Union soldiers. The shock of losing his son and his entire fortune all within the space of a few days was too much for the elderly Abraham Smith, and his health and will to live deteriorated rapidly. Now, within a year and a half of the battle at the salt works, the old farmer passed away a broken man. A few years later, his son Samuel received a strange letter. It was addressed to the late father, but was dated nearly 2 years earlier, and was from a Corporal Allen E. Brooks, formerly of Stoneman's cavalry unit. Its message surprised and shocked Samuel. It told what had happened to his brother Eli and the buried catch of Smith's treasure. The letter read, "Kind sir, I am in pain and upon my deathbed, but I feel I must divest my conscience of a burden that has kept constant company with my soul since shortly after we fought over the salt works there. Your son Eli, fearing he would be hanged, made a deal with my first sergeant, Jack Harrington, to share your fortune with him, an amount of some $46,000 in gold and silver coins, $12,000 in jewelry, and several gold watches. In return, your son was to be helped to escape into Tennessee. Your son was not killed during the fighting. Harrington murdered him later on the pretext that he was escaping. With my help, Harrington removed the cache and hid it in a saltpeter cave about a quarter of a mile distant from the little town church. Harrington was accidentally killed in a blast while we were destroying the saltpeter caves before we abandoned the area. I took a mini ball at the Battle of 7 Mile Ford and have made unable to travel since. I had planned to return to Saltville and reveal the location of your money to you, but I am dying and I want you to know that I took no part in the murder of your son. Respectfully, Corporal Allen E. Brooks, late of the 40th Mounted Infantry, Army of the U.S., General Stoneman commanding. Now, using the letter from Corporal Brooks as a guide, Samuel Smith tried several times to find the treasure. The Saltpeter Cave was a natural cave in Poor Valley, between Allison's Gap and Saltville. Many caves in the area had been blasted shut and otherwise destroyed by Stoneman's troops during the Battle of the Salt Works, and removing the debris from all of them would have been a formidable and expensive task for Samuel Smith. His efforts to find the treasure proved vain, and he eventually gave up and moved away. Most who have searched this tale believe that the Smith treasure is hidden in a cavern known locally as Harmon's Cave. All attempts at finding the $58,000 worth of gold and silver coins and jewels, however, have failed. There are several other caves in this region, and in one of them, it is likely that the Smith fortune still reposes on the floor of some deep chamber. Alright, we're going to talk about the Gray Ghost's lost treasure. General John Singleton Mosby was one of the better known and more colorful leaders of the Confederate Army during the war between the states. A University of Virginia graduate and practicing lawyer, Mosby joined the Southern Army as a private at the outbreak of the war. After serving as scout for General J.E.B. Stuart during the Peninsula Campaign and earning recognition for valor at Bull Run and Antietam, Mosby was promoted to colonel. In 1863, he organized and led a guerrilla unit called Mosby's Raiders. With this team of fearless fighting men, he conducted a campaign of harassment and predation against Union forces in Virginia and Maryland that made his name legendary. Union soldiers who had no success in pursuing Mosby and his raiders began calling him the Gray Ghost, a name by which he is still known. Now, in the spring of 1863, Mosby captured $350,000 worth of gold, silver, jewelry, and coins during a desperate flight from Yankee pursuit and buried it secretly in Fauquier County in the Appalachian Piedmont. Mosby and his raiders had attacked the Fairfax courthouse, where they surprised and captured Union General Edwin H. Stoughton. Though a general, Stoughton was never seen as much of a leader by most Union officers. The overweight and overbearing general had too much appetite for fine foods, wines, and women, and he lacked enthusiasm for combat. When Colonel Mosby and his hand-picked guerrillas entered the courthouse, they found Stoughton surrounded by casks of wine and great stores of food. Stoughton had apparently taken over the courthouse as his private quarters for the duration of the war. And in spite of the bloody conflict around him, the hedonistic general saw to it that he himself wanted for little during those trying times. Though Stoughton was guarded by 2 captains and 38 enlisted men, the practiced raiders took him with ease. Mosby also captured 58 horses, several carriages, numerous crates of victuals and drink, and about $350,000 worth of gold and silver plate coins, jewelry, and tableware that Stoughton's soldiers had looted from Southern homes. Colonel Mosby had all the valuables gathered up and placed in a large canvas bag, learning that the large Union forces were in the area searching for him. Mosby had his guerrillas hurriedly load the booty into the carriages, and with Stoughton and his men as prisoners, they fled southwest toward the town of Culpeper, where General Stuart awaited him. Now, Mosby's raiders, along with the captives and cargo, raced through the rolling hills of the Appalachian Piedmont, a low eroded plateau that offered a transition from the rugged highlands to gentle lay of the coastal plain. Now, when the guerrilla force crossed into Fauquier County, one of Mosby's scouts raced back to the colonel with the news that a Union cavalry contingent was bearing down on them from the northeast. Because the captured goods were slowing the retreat to Culpeper, Mosby decided to ditch the barrels of wine and the crates of food. He also elected to bury the large canvas sack of treasure. By Mosby's later recollection, the raiders halted briefly about midway between the towns of Haymarket and New Baltimore to unload the excess baggage. While his soldiers quickly dumped the cargo from the carriages, Mosby, accompanied by his trusted Sergeant James F. Ames, carried the large sack some distance from the trail and placed it in a hastily dug hole between two tall pines. After filling the hole, Mosby notched several tree trunks with his knife so the site could be easily identified on a return visit. Mosby expected to retrace his trail within a few days and dig up the treasure, but the war kept him busy and carried him farther and farther from Fauquier County. When the war was over, Mosby returned to his law practice and settled in Western Virginia, far from where he fought during the war. He never returned to the Piedmont to retrieve the treasure. Now, Mosby, as well as members of his crack guerrilla unit, often told of burying the treasure along the Rocky Trail during the flight from the Fairfax courthouse. Though many knew about the fortune, only Mosby and Ames knew the exact location. Sergeant Ames, however, would never reveal the secret. During the war, he was captured by General George Armstrong Custer and hanged at Fort Royal. When asked why he never returned for the treasure, John S. Mosby, the famed Gray Ghost and Confederate war hero, would always evade the question and change the subject. Of course, the question of the buried treasure would return. It was raised again in 1916 when Mosby was 83 and near death. Responded the Gray Ghost, "I've always meant to return to the area and look for that catch we buried after capturing Staunton. Some of the most precious heirlooms of old Virginia were buried there. I guess that one of these days someone will find it." The catched canvas sack of gold, silver, jewelry, and other items hidden by Mosby on that spring day in 1863 will be worth several $1,000,000 today. Many treasure hunters have tried to retrace Mosby's retreat from the Fairfax courthouse to the rendezvous with General Stuart at Culpeper, but none could ever be certain of the route. Alright, we're going to talk about the Snow Hill Farm treasure. Sometime in the late 1760s, a Scotsman named William Kirk brought his wife to Fauquier County to settle. The couple was soft-spoken and rarely found in the company of others. Their reclusiveness was a small mystery to the townspeople of New Baltimore, who would have been shocked to learn of the notorious background of this polite, kindly, and well-dressed man. Years earlier, William Kirk had been an infamous pirate. His years of freebooting brought him adventure and great wealth, but as he grew older, he realized his violent days at sea were numbered. By anyone's standard, Kirk was a wealthy man, made rich by looting the merchant vessels that plied the ocean between North America and Europe. Taking his wealth, Kirk retired from pirating and lived quietly in a small town on the Carolina coast. Here he met and married his wife and settled into respectability, determined to keep his lawless past a secret. Now, in time, Kirk and his wife decided to move to the higher lands of the Virginia Piedmont. Through an intermediary, he arranged to buy Snow Hill Farm, a relatively prosperous plantation in Fauquier County, about a mile south of the New Baltimore settlement. Now, Kirk proved as adept at running a large farm as he had been at piracy. He hired several men to work on his plantation and soon turned it into a prosperous enterprise. All the while, Kirk and his wife fed local curiosity about their lives by rarely going to town, preferring instead to send one of the hired men. Kirk distrusted banks and hid his wealth in places known only to himself. Now, the ex-buccaneer never told his wife about any of his secret caches. Afraid someone might accidentally discover one of them, he would occasionally dig them up and rebury them elsewhere. According to documents in the Fauquier County Courthouse, Kirk possessed an estimated $60,000 in gold and silver coins, a tremendous fortune for the time. Now, Kirk and his wife apparently lived a quiet and happy life on Snow Hill Farm for about 18 years. His health finally began to deteriorate from several serious bouts of pneumonia, and William Kirk died in his sleep in 1779. Before he did, he drafted a will leaving his entire estate to his wife. The will alerted her to the cached wealth. She searched for months after his death, but never found any of it. Though she lived in relative comfort for many years, the work and responsibility of running Snow Hill Farm became too much for the widow Kirk, and she eventually sold the property to a man named William Edmonds. Edmonds continued to farm the plantation much as Kirk had, and the property passed down through a succession of heirs. Now, in the 1870s, the Edmonds descendants ran most of Snow Hill Farm on shares, paying several sharecroppers a part of the profits of their harvest and letting them live on the land. Now, one day, one of the tenant farmers was breaking ground in a field when the plow hit something hard in the dirt. Thinking he had struck a rock, the farmer stopped the mule and went to work to remove it. His plow had hit a large porcelain crock. Removing the lid, the astonished farmer found the crock filled with gold and silver coins. Not sure what to do with his find, he returned to his modest home and sent his youngest son to tell the plantation owner of the discovery. Between the time the lad was sent and the owner arrived, the farmer thought better of announcing his discovery and hid the crock, keeping only a handful of the coins in his pocket. When the owner arrived, the farmer showed him the few coins he had set aside. The plantation owner was unimpressed with the discovery and let the farmer keep the few coins. Now, a few weeks later, the landowner began to wonder what the sharecropper had actually found. It seems he purchased a nearby farm for $8,000 in cash and spent another $2,000 on equipment and supplies. Many New Baltimore residents of the time believed the sharecropper had chanced upon a catch from William Kirk's fortune, booty taken long ago in pirating escapades. The story of the discovery soon spread throughout the Piedmont, and people came to Snow Hill Farm to search the fields for other likely caches. Over the years, several coins minted in the 18th and 19th centuries have been found on the old plantation, but no large caches. Some $50,000 of the original William Kirk pirate fortune could still be hidden somewhere on Snow Hill Farm, and if it were found, could well be worth 10 to 20 times that amount today. If the original boundaries of the Snow Hill Farm when it was purchased by Kirk in the 1760s could be determined, it would be easy to grid the property and systematically explore it with a sophisticated metal detector. Simple enough if the present owners would permit it, and if the treasure has not already been discovered and removed. Alright, y'all, we're going to talk about the dollhouse treasure of Upshur County. From the Appalachian Plateau region of West Virginia comes one of the more bizarre tales of hidden treasure. A tale of a strange and reclusive Spaniard, an even stranger miniature house, and $330,000 of alleged bank robbery loot. The Appalachian Plateau, which takes in most of the northern and western West Virginia, is an elevated tract of nearly flat to gently folding land ranging in altitude from 1,000 feet along the western edge to more than 3,000 feet where it meets the Allegheny front in the east and south. Ancient glacial abrasion and the more recent erosion by flowing water have sculpted the plateau into gentle hills and deep valleys. Into one of these valleys in 1889 came a dark little stoop-shouldered man, giving his name as Alfonso Marzo. The man approached a farmer named Shehan about purchasing some land on which to build a cabin. Marzo, who claimed he was from Spain, offered gold. Shehan and Marzo haggled briefly, then struck a deal, and the Spaniard became the owner of a few acres near the railroad tracks about a mile from Shehan's house. Carrying all his possessions in a large canvas sack and a suitcase-sized metal trunk, Marzo moved on to his new property and built a house. It was a queer little home and a dramatically scaled down version of a normal frame house that looked like a miniature, such as one would build for young children to play in. The neighbors dubbed it the dollhouse. Though Shahan and other local residents tried to be friendly, Marzo remained distant. He shunned visitors and actually fled into the woods at the approach of strangers. Marzo rarely visited the town to purchase supplies, and on the few times he did venture into a settlement, he conducted what little business he had and left as quickly as possible. Marzo gave Shahan the impression that he was a blacksmith, but he didn't seem to have any of the tools of the trade. Other than building the dollhouse, Marzo was never seen to work. Marzo lived on his property for nearly 4 years, then suddenly and mysteriously disappeared. The Spaniard left no word with anyone. He simply vanished. All that remained to remind anyone of him was the odd dollhouse still seen occasionally by passers-by. Now, several years elapsed, and Shahan was surprised to receive a letter one day from Marzo. It was dated August 17, 1911, and was postmarked Madrid, Spain. The letter read, "My dear sir, I am imprisoned in this city, and knowing your honesty and personality, I beg to beseech you to herewith whether you want to come here to take away my equipages, seizure in order to seize upon a trunk containing a secret in which I have hidden a document indispensable to you to come in possession of $330,000 that I have in the United States. As a reward, I will yield to you the third part of the aforementioned sum. Fearful that this letter don't arrive at your hands, I will want your answer, and then I will say you my secret with every detail, and to subscribe with my name." As here is a newspaper that publish all the cablegrams whose addressee are unknown, which is allowed to me to read, and I cannot receive here in the Gaul your reply. You must send a cablegram to the address indicated at the end. Notwithstanding your cable not reached to me, this will be sufficient to know that you accept my proposition. Waiting eagerly to read your missive, I only inscribe V. X. Banker. Above all, please answer by cable, but not by letter, as following: Alfonso Marzo, Isabel Catolica Zio, Madrid. Yes, Julius. While much of Marzo's letter is vague and difficult to interpret, probably a result of the Spaniard's poor command of the English language, some points are clear. First, Marzo apparently knew where $330,000 lay hidden and had secreted a document somewhere which gave directions to the cache. Was the trunk the letter mentioned the same one he brought to the West Virginia Valley? Second, Marzo was apparently willing to share a third of the alleged wealth with Shahan. Third, the Spaniard said he was a prisoner in Madrid, although he gave no explanation. Shahan had trouble understanding the cryptic letter and was not quite certain what to make of it. In any case, he did not reply to the Spaniard and never received any more correspondence from him. One element of Marzo's mysterious letter has puzzled researchers for years. If the $300,000 did in fact exist, where did it come from, and how did it come to be in the Spaniard's possession? Perhaps Marzo's fortune can be tied to an incident that occurred elsewhere in the state several weeks before his quiet arrival at the Shahan farm. Somewhere east of Upshur County, a bank was robbed, and the little documentation that exists suggests that about $350,000 was taken. Coincidence? And what of the dollhouse? No satisfactory reason has ever been given for the building of the strange little structure. Did it have anything to do with the $330,000? A story told around Upshur County following the arrival of Marzo's letter was that the Spaniard had indeed robbed the bank and fled with his stolen loot to the Appalachian Plateau, where he buried it beneath the dollhouse. This tale sent many area residents to the valley in which Marzo had lived, searching for the miniature house. They could never find it. Farmer Shehan, who seldom visited the Marzo property when the Spaniard was there, rode over shortly after receiving the letter. The dollhouse was gone. There was no evidence that it had fallen down or burned. It had simply disappeared without a trace. Try as they might, neither Shehan nor any of his neighbors could remember just where the mysterious dollhouse had sat on the property. Attempts to trace Alfonso Marzo back to Spain failed, and what became of him remains a mystery. As far as anyone knows, the Spaniard never returned to the Appalachian Plateau to reclaim any of the treasure thought buried on his small plot of land. Documents on the old Shehan farm, located near the junction of Bear Camp Run and the left fork of the Buckhannon River in the southeastern corner of Upshur County, somewhere not far from the original Shehan cabin. The mysterious dollhouse treasure still lies buried. Alright, we're going to talk about the peddler's lost catch. Moise Edelman was an unlikely source of buried treasure, but over the course of several years, the old immigrant peddler apparently buried several thousand of dollars worth of gold coins in a secret location in West Virginia, intending someday to retrieve them. Now Edelman, however, suffered a fatal heart attack and died before he could enjoy any of the fruits of his hard work and systematic saving. Before he died, Edelman stammered out the directions to his buried fortune to the physician who was attending him in a Cleveland, Ohio hospital. Now Moise Edelman, known to his customers as Mose, was born early in the 1880s in a Jewish ghetto in Russia. As a boy, Moise was weak and sickly and often complained of chest pains. In his teens, Moise fled Russia and made his way to England, where he could not find decent work. Now the young man often labored 18 hours a day at menial jobs that paid little, but because he was frugal, he saved enough money to buy a steamer ticket to the United States. When Moise arrived in America, he worked at various low-paying jobs and eventually became a peddler. In the beginning, the young man toted a large canvas sack filled with household wares such as were needed by the people of the remote and rural parts of the Appalachians in Virginia and West Virginia. Burdened by the heavy bag, the dedicated merchant traveled on foot from house to house and farm to farm, selling his goods. Travel was usually difficult in the rugged, sparsely settled Appalachians during that time, and the weather was often disagreeable, but Moise persevered. Between 1916 and 1930, he walked thousands of miles of backcountry roads in the hills and valleys of the Appalachian Plateau. Because Moise had miserly habits and no family or other apparent expenses, his savings grew. By 1930, he had amassed what in those days amounted to a large fortune. The immigrant peddler's distrust of banks led him to convert his money into gold coins and bury them on a riverbank somewhere in Lincoln County on western West Virginia. Now, as Moise grew older, carrying a heavy pack through the rugged mountains country exacted an increasingly heavy toll on his frail frame. He finally bought an inexpensive second-hand automobile. Moise occasionally would stay in a hotel, but more often than not, he lived in his old car. In June 1933, Moise drove to Ohio to purchase a new line of household goods from a dealer he knew. Now, while loading merchandise into his car, the peddler was felled by a sudden heart attack and rushed to the local hospital. After several days of intensive care and many consultations with the attending physician, Moise realized that his weakened heart would not recover and that he would soon die. One morning, when the doctor stopped by Moise's room, the peddler reached out and grasped the physician's lab coat and pulled him closer. Feeling weaker with each passing moment, The dying man haltingly whispered to the doctor that he had something important he needed to tell him. With difficulty, Moisey told him how he had acquired wealth and then buried gold coins many times along a remote creek bank in West Virginia. When he told the doctor he wished to give him directions to the fortune, the physician grabbed a notepad and pencil and quickly jotted down the peddler's final words. And these are his words. Go along the hard road until you reach Fry, a small community between Logan and Huntington, West Virginia. Go toward the settlement of Leet across the mountain from Fry. At Leet, Laurel Fork Creek empties into the Big Ugly River. Go up Laurel Fork for a mile or two until you reach a large rock. Directly across the road from the rock, in a small bend of the creek, thousands of dollars are in 4 chests. Dig along the bank. A few moments later, Moisey Edelman, peddler, was dead. The doctor believed Edelman was sincere and that the information he gave was not a raving caused by delirium. Several weeks later, the doctor took several days off to travel to Lincoln County, West Virginia, where he searched for Moisey Edelman's buried treasure. The physician was amazed to discover how remote and rugged the area was, and how many miles of creek bank might conceal the peddler's gold coins. Several spots along Laurel Fork Creek fit Edelman's description, but after digging a series of holes at several sites, the doctor came away with nothing. Discouraged by his poor luck and the immensity of the task, and burdened by the obligations of his medical practice, the physician packed up and returned to Cleveland after a few days. Now, Moisey Edelman's description does include a lot of territory. Perhaps someday a treasure hunter with a reliable metal detector and a bit of luck may uncover the gold peddler's buried money. Now we're going to talk about the hidden treasure in the Buchanan River Valley. During the height of the Civil War, a soldier whose name has been lost to history dropped by the Wilson farm in a sparsely settled portion of Monongalia County. The soldier and Wilson were old friends, and the farmer and his wife asked their guest to stay the night. Wondering why his friend was not with his military unit, Wilson asked several pointed questions. The soldier said he was on temporary leave, and then unfolded an amazing tale of a hidden treasure for which he was searching. The vast fortune lay in a lost cave in the upper reaches of the Buchanan River Valley, about 50 miles to the south in Upshur County. The soldier had just returned from Upshur County, where he had been thwarted in his search by roving bands of outlaws and opposing military detachments, both making travel through the remote and unprotected West Virginia wilderness difficult, if not impossible. After the evening meal, when the soldier and Wilson were alone, the guest opened a large leather traveling bag and took out an 18-inch square parchment map. He showed Wilson where the map said the treasure was buried. The soldier told Wilson about a party of miners who had been taking bags of coins and ingots of silver east when they were set upon by a roving band of Indians. Fleeing, the miners hid in a cave and buried the ingots and coins in the far corner of a large chamber. In the dark of night, the miners silently crept from their hiding place and continued their journey east, intending to come back someday for the fortune. The miners, according to the young soldier, never returned, and the treasure still lay in the cave. His map was made by one of the miners who drowned in a rain-swollen river while trying to return to the cave. Now the map, he said, was useless without its key, held by a close friend just to the west in Marion County. Wilson shared the soldier's enthusiasm for the hidden treasure. The two agreed to become partners, get the key, and search for the treasure together. Now the soldier, however, was overdue in reporting back to his cavalry unit and said that he needed to be on his way. Leaving the map with Wilson, the soldier gave directions to the Marion County resident with the map key. He asked Wilson to wait for him to return, but to pursue the search on his own if he was not back within a reasonable time after the war ended. With that, the soldier bid farewell to his friend and rode away into the woods. The farmer never saw him again. Now Wilson waited nearly 2 years after the end of the war for his partner's return. Finally, he decided to go to Marion County and get the key. Wilson packed a wagon, hitched up 2 stout horses, and at the last minute invited his grandson along. The trip through the rugged and often dangerous wilderness was long and hard, and an unforgettable experience for the younger Wilson. Now, decades later, when Joseph M. Wilson was himself a grandfather, he easily recalled the arduous trip through the Appalachian backcountry. It rained often, and they had difficulty crossing streams. The wagon occasionally bogged down in the mud, and the two had to slog through the muck and high water to help the horses pull free. Now, the younger Wilson also recalled that at one point during the return trip, his grandfather told him he knew he now had the key and could go directly to the cave and find the treasure. Unfortunately, once they returned home, the old man became very sick and died. Because he was so young, Joseph Wilson had little inkling of the potential worth of the buried treasure that the map and key supposedly led to. Now, several years later, when he had developed an appreciation for the value of money, he recalled his grandfather's quest. He also recalled that his grandfather was a very conservative man, not one to waste time. That he had traveled across 2 counties to get the key to the treasure map suggested to young Wilson that the old man had thought it important. Now, Joseph Wilson's family moved to another valley, but when he was old enough, he went to his grandmother's home and asked about the map and the key left by his late grandfather. After searching through several drawers, old trunks, and bundles of paper, he found the map. Carefully unrolling it, young Wilson noted that it was a very old, stiff parchment. The inscriptions on the map were finely written in ink, and while clear and easy to read, were vague about the amount and type of treasure. Nothing on the map told the origin of the treasure or who buried it. Now, diligent searching failed to turn up the key. The grandmother, who could neither read nor write, confessed she might have burned it along with some other papers she considered worthless. After several weeks of studying the map, the younger Wilson determined that the treasure had long ago been hidden in a cave close to the old Seneca War Trail, where it crossed the upper Buchanan River in Upshur County. Now, according to the map, the trail could be seen from the cave's low entrance. Without the key, Joseph Wilson searched for the treasure cave several times but never found it. After several years, he gave up and in 1891 turned the map over to one Lucullus Virgil McWhorter, a native of the town of Buchanan. Now, McWhorter was one of the few educated men living in the area at the time. During the early 1880s, McWhorter had conducted a detailed study of local Indian artifacts and campgrounds. Wilson gave McWhorter the map because he seemed keenly interested in local history. Wilson also told McWhorter what he knew of the origin of the map and of the lost key. McWhorter was interested in the tale of buried treasure and tried to find it several times himself, with no success. Now, in 1915, McWhorter published an account of the lost treasure cave. Though many others, using the old parchment map or copies of it, have searched for the lost treasure cave, none have found it. Researchers have diligently pursued an explanation for the origin of the treasure, and many believe that it is part of a shipment of silver ingots from one of the famed Jonathan Swift mines. Now, members of the Swift party often pass through the Buchanan River Valley on their way to and from the mines in Kentucky, and Jonathan Swift himself makes several references to the area in his journals. One particular entry by Swift may shed some light on the hidden treasure. While establishing a temporary camp along what many think was the Buchanan River, the Swift party was suddenly attacked by Indians. Quickly strapping the packs of ingots and equipment onto their mules, the miners fled along the Seneca Trail, eventually taking refuge in a cave near the headwaters of the stream. While several men guarded the entrance, others buried the bars of silver. Relieved of their heavy load, the miners waited until darkness and then escaped, intending someday to return and retrieve the wealth secreted in some dark chamber of the cave. It may also be worth noting that Swift occasionally referred to rich silver mines in the Buchanan River Valley, which he and his men excavated during 1761. It may very well have been silver taken from one of these mines that was cached in the lost cave. Many mining tools, all of them quite old, have been found in the Buchanan River Valley, and they may have belonged to the Swift party. In addition, at least 2 very old mine shafts have been discovered. The shafts had been covered up in a careless attempt at concealment, but years of erosion have exposed the openings. Now, few people these days have reason to travel to the relatively isolated upper reaches of the Buchanan River in Upshur County. The local tales and legends of lost mines and buried treasures are relatively unknown to outsiders, and so there have been few organized attempts to find the lost cave. Continued research and organized systematic exploration of the area might someday yield one of the country's largest treasure caches. Other tales of lost and buried treasures in West Virginia. The Cavern of Gold by Bear Fork Creek. 2 friends were deer hunting near Bear Fork Creek in Gilmer County in the early 1950s when they accidentally discovered a thick seam of gold in a remote cavern. The 2 had taken a few days off from their jobs as coal miners. Happy to be away from the mines and out in the peace and solitude of the forest, the friends approached the hunt with enthusiasm. Around mid-morning of their second day in the woods, they had spotted fresh deer tracks and followed them for nearly 2 miles when they chanced upon a cave. Neither of the men had ever been in a cave, and they decided to explore this one. Carrying crude torches made from grasses and tree limbs, the 2 crept cautiously into the dark passageway. 60 yards into the cave, they noticed one wall painted with Indian signs and symbols. While one examined the markings, the other discovered a long, thick line of color transecting the opposite wall. On closer inspection, the hunters discovered the color was a vein of gold. The 2 friends returned to their homes and jobs the following day and began to make plans to return to the cave to excavate some of the rich ore. Several months passed before they could coordinate their vacation time so they could go back to Gilmer County, find the cave again, and dig out some of the gold. Eventually, they returned to Bear Fork Creek, where they set up camp. On the morning of the following day, the 2 friends began their search. Armed with digging tools, they trudged up and down hills and through valleys, trying to retrace the route they had followed, tracking the deer months earlier. After 3 days of fruitless searching, they admitted they had no inkling where the cave might be. They had failed to take note of pertinent landmarks and features in their haste to get home after their discovery. The 2 men thought they could walk right to the Cave of Gold, but in the several months since their trip, they had apparently forgotten much of what they saw. Disheartened, they returned home. Apparently known to the Indians of long ago, the Cave of Gold remains lost. Hidden gold in Jefferson County. Colonel Joseph Van Swearingen, a retired veteran of the Revolutionary War, bought a small farm and settled into the community of Bellevue in Jefferson County. Swearingen had been a soldier for nearly 40 years and had grown weary of the profession. He looked forward to living out the rest of his life in leisure, growing a few crops on the acreage he purchased. Now, during his years in the military, Swearingen had accumulated impressive wealth, much of it booty he had taken in wartime. Though no one knew exactly how much money the old soldier had, the Bellevue townsfolk saw the colonel as an extremely wealthy man. One day, while in a nearby town on business, Swearingen visited a fortune teller who predicted he would die within the year. Normally not one to believe in such things, Swearingen began to think of his mortality and decided to hide his fortune somewhere on his farm. Swearingen had a field hand dig a pit, and into the pit he put an iron kettle filled with gold and silver coins. He told no one where it was buried, and as far as anyone knows, left no written record of it either. Within the year, Swearingen died at the exact hour and day predicted by the spiritualist. Swearingen left no heirs, and the small farm soon fell into disrepair. Stories of his buried wealth spread throughout the area, and occasional treasure hunters would set up camp for a few days at the old farm while they searched for the buried coins. The cache was never recorded as having been found. Alright, the lost Fort Siebert treasure. Old Fort Siebert lay in the heart of Indian country, and relationships between the fort's inhabitants and the Shawnee were strained at best. In 1758, growing tensions gave way to violence, and the Shawnee launched a vicious attack on the fort, killing most of the soldiers and capturing many civilians living in the stockade. The Shawnee decided to keep the white prisoners as slaves and roped them together and marched them from the fort toward the Indian village several miles away. Before leaving the fort, the Indians had the settlers gather up all their valuables and put them in a large iron kettle. When the kettle was filled, the Indians inserted a wooden pole through the handle and had 2 of the male captives carry it to the Shawnee village. The big pot, full of gold and silver coins and other valuables, was heavy and hard to manage. The 2 men assigned to it wrestled with the cumbersome load, sometimes falling and spilling the contents. To reach the Shawnee village, the party of Indians and captives followed a well-used trail up one side of South Fork Mountain. As the trail grew steeper, the men carrying the treasure-filled kettle had even greater difficulty. Finally, the Shawnee chief, tired of the clumsiness of the white men, ordered them to leave the pot and signaled the group to continue the march. When the column was out of sight, the chief had two of his braves scrape out a hole and bury the pot of its contents. This was done in a few minutes, and the Indians rejoined the group and continued on to the village. Several weeks later, the Shawnee village was attacked by a large rescue party. The Indians were routed and the captives returned to safety. After their release, several of the former prisoners tried to find the pot of coins, but saw no evidence of a recent excavation. Since the Shawnee were driven from the area never to return, they probably didn't have a chance to retrieve the treasure. If the route from Fort Siebert to the Shawnee village could be retraced, a persistent and fortunate treasure hunter with a good metal detector might find the buried kettle of coins. Abandoned Union payroll near Chapmanville. In Fayette County during the war between the states, a contingent of Union soldiers was escorting a large payroll, a wagon full of gold coins, to a Yankee encampment in the area. Now, as the party traveled along the winding trails through the dense woods, scouts told the commanding officer that a Confederate patrol was rapidly approaching from the east. The Union officer ordered the escort into a full gallop in the hope of outdistancing the rebels. But after trying to elude the enemy for about 5 miles, it became clear that they would soon be overtaken. Anticipating a skirmish, the officer halted the wagon and ordered the canvas bags that held the Union payroll taken from the wagon and buried a short distance from the trail. While troopers hastily dug a pit in which to hide the gold, the officer noted the surroundings in his journal. He wrote that the payroll was hidden on the west side of the Boyandot River near a small settlement named Chapmanville. Once the hole was filled, the soldiers remounted and rode on. About an hour later, the Confederates overtook the Union soldiers and opened fire. The Yankees sought cover and returned fire, but they were disorganized and greatly outnumbered. The fighting lasted about 2 hours, and when it was over, all of the Yankee soldiers lay dead. The rebel soldiers searched the wagon for the money and found it empty. Suspecting the gold had been buried shortly before the engagement, they retraced the Yankees' trail for several miles without finding the payroll. Returning to the site of the skirmish, the Confederates stripped the Union soldiers of anything of value and left the corpses to rot in the sun. An unknown soldier took the commanding officer's journal and later tossed it into a trunk and forgot it. In the early 1930s, someone discovered the old journal and searched unsuccessfully for the buried coins. The directions in the journal claimed the gold was buried at a point where the old road and the Boyandot River came within 20 yards of one another. Since the war, however, the road has been all but obliterated by a more modern thoroughfare, and the river has shifted its course. If the Union payroll of gold coins was not uncovered by the shifting river and washed downstream, the Civil War cache is probably still lying just a few inches beneath the soil near Chapmanville.